And we are live. And today I'm going to share with you something very, very powerful, some life-changing transformational information about understanding your shadow or your darker side. I'll break down what that is, how to understand it, how it might be playing out in your life or other people's life around you, and how powerful it is to bring that darker side into the light, or at least to understand it. And if you don't, what might happen? If we have not met yet, my name is Troy Fontana, and I want to help you in the areas of health, wealth, and relationships. I'm the author of a book called A Climb to the Top. I also coach some top performing CEOs and professional athletes. And I want to help you in this video. So let's dive into it. What is the shadow? Maybe you're familiar with that term, maybe you're not. But essentially, the shadow is a part that even our ego, if you think of yourself as parts, maybe you got this higher self, the spirit, the soul, then you have an ego that kind of envelops around it, that gets developed through childhood, even as an adult. But the shadow is a part that even the ego doesn't identify with, because it's often not acceptable. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't feel good to society. And so even the ego kind of pushes it aside, and therefore it is the shadow or your darker self, your dark side. And so let's talk about this. What does that look like? Let's say, we're human, right? So we all at times have insecurities, things we're worried about, things that come from our past, right? These deep traumatic wounds, oftentimes what might be called a core wound. But let's break this down a little bit. So imagine that you have this fear of abandonment. And let's say you have some insecurities around being enough, your self-worth, okay? So for a time, those deep-rooted insecurities, they come off maybe as positive. So that might lead you to be like a really hard worker. Maybe you overdo. You're always trying to, essentially what you're trying to do is get validation, right? So you're proving to yourself that you are enough. It's a very powerful point right there. But for a time, that can look really good. Like, oh man, he or she, you're a really hard worker. Look at all the results they have. It might produce results. And let's say when you're in a relationship, you have a fear of abandonment, and it might come off as like you really care. You're really protective around this person. And so for a season, these can look like a good thing, but the shadow is still there because it's unhealed and it's unhealthy. It's still stuck in the deep, deep, deep wounds of insecurity, deep wounds of abandonment, deep wounds of feeling like I'm not enough. And if we don't look at those things, remember the ego self won't even look at it. So even like your ego doesn't want to acknowledge those things. So it just pushes them further and further and further away. What happens when we suppress? We become oppressed and eventually depressed. So it's this dark, heavy energy. And so then what happens over time, who knows exactly when this starts to take place. But what starts to take place is your shadow continues to drive you forward, but it's unhealthy, it's unresolved. And so these things become, these behaviors and activities become almost unconscious. So it once served you well, so maybe he or she was a hard worker, start to envelop your life. I mean, like it starts to take over and consume your life. And so maybe you were a hard worker and you worked 10 hours a day. Pretty soon you're working 12, 14. You don't know when to stop. It consumes your mind, it consumes your thoughts. And I can't even relate to you. Those around you can't even understand you anymore, right? Because you're consumed by this energy. Maybe in a relationship, what first looked like connection, deep care, starts to consume you with jealousy, with envy. And it shows in these behavior patterns that are almost unconscious because, again, they're driven by the shadow. Think of it almost like, it'll show up like this too. As a male, male and females have both qualities, right? You're going to have either masculine energies or feminine energies. And when they're healthy, they're really good. Like, so a masculine trait might be like to be decisive, to be able to add direction to things, to be able to add security and stability and safety. So that's when it's healthy, when you're healed. But when it's unconscious, that shadow side is still there, like decisive and direction turns into control. And so those are the clear signs that you haven't healed or looked into your shadow. And so your darker side, well, at times can motivate you, right? It can drive you into like, it can produce really good things, right? And that's where the ego will only look at that. So maybe athletics, right? You're really good at athletics, right? And you're succeeding in this area. Like, wow, he or she is so good. And you get all this like praise. But again, left unconscious, you keep going. You don't know when to stop. Pretty soon your body's breaking down. Pretty soon you're pushing people away outside of you. Your ego gets stronger and stronger and uncontrollable. And it's a very, very dangerous thing. And so what you, again, going to those qualities of masculine and feminine, the feminine natures, you also have like a nature. One thing about the feminine energy is like it's very spontaneous, it's very creative, it can be very in the moment. A beautiful thing about feminine energy, right? But again, left unconscious, when it's in the shadow realm, when it's unhealthy, it becomes toxic. And so what that toxicity then looks like is chaos, right? It's too much, it's out of control, it's seeking for validation everywhere. And so you're looking into like, whether this is you, right, in your life, or maybe the people around you, you're looking for these qualities of where does it show up in your behavior? How do I think, right? Am I controlling the situation, or am I relaxed with the situation? If I'm in relationship, right, with someone, am I controlling the environment? What is that? Why? There's something behind that. There's a shadow reason behind that. And so then what you want to do ultimately is you want to look into the shadow. And this is where you bring the light to the darkness. Before I get there, I want to explain a valuable point, at least worth for us to look into. And that is, if the shadow is left unnoticed, right, unhealed, this darker energy, however you want to frame this, you can look at it from heaven, from hell, like Star Wars, right? The dark to the light, right? The dark empire. Essentially, think of where you're channeling your energy. So like your movement in life, this soul, this energy, your entire being is going somewhere. It's moving, right? But is it rooted in those insecurities, those fears? Am I enough? Am I going to be abandoned? This jealousy, this insecurity starts to manifest from there. And that is the actual driver of your life. Very powerful concept right there. Again, it's kind of, can't really point a finger to it necessarily. Just think about it, feel into that. Or as those things get healed, it's not there. You don't need those. You don't need those reassurances, right? You feel like you're already enough. You're already whatever, right? And you actually are creating from a space of giving to others, right? Rather than competing for a slice of the pie, you're actually adding to the entire pie, the collective unit. But a lot of people get stuck. And again, anything I'm sharing with you, I've been familiar with myself. I've gone through an experience. A lot of my stuff comes from firsthand experience. And then finding context on it later and going, oh, I was that guy, right? I went through there, I did that. But essentially you have these energies at play, right? These parts of ourselves deep in our psyche. And the most powerful thing, again, about the dark side of ourselves or the shadow side of ourselves, the reason it's hard to consciously be aware of, powerful point right there, to be conscious of, to create awareness around, is because even the ego doesn't want to look at it. The ego will look at your hard work. Hey, dude, I'm a hard worker, right? But when we go deeper into it, like you realize maybe you're beating yourself up. There's no self-love around it. And if there's no self-love, there's something else going on. I remember that happening for me. There's a season in my life where I just had looked at my body and I'd used my body. Very grateful for what it has allowed me to do. But it was all just like being used. It was to like, hey, look here, I'm enough. If I do more of this, if I win this thing, if I have that, then I'll finally be accepted. Shadow, 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 shadow. Insecurity, insecurity. And so I was deriving my energy from that. And so by going into the shadow and looking at those things, healing those things, then you bring light to that darkness. So the healing process might look like noticing those behaviors. I have these good qualities, right? But then watch, that good quality can become even better, right? Let's say you're a hard worker, right? And it's derived from this like, oh man, do I feel like I'm enough? All these stories, insecurities, I got to build this. But when you just heal that and you go, man, I'm enough as I am. I've always been enough, right? Maybe I wasn't shown that from my past. Maybe my parents or those around me, what I kind of embodied as a story. Again, I have other videos about stories, how the mind works through these things and creates these simplified stories. Therefore, then also creating beliefs, which kind of take your life on a different trajectory. But as you kind of unpack those and understand those more, you start to realize that, man, I've always been enough. I'm good just as I am. Then that kind of like suppresses, it brings light to it. And then you can create from like where you actually want to create. Like, let's say, again, I'll use hard work, right? I'm working hard towards this, but I'm actually working just to prove to other people that I'm enough. So then you actually redirect. You get a new course in your life and you do something that you actually enjoy. Very powerful, like destiny changing type shit, right? Let's say it's a relationship. You're like, man, I've been dating guys, girls based on their looks because that makes me feel secure. If he or she looks good and I don't feel like I look good, then that brings me up. Shadow, right? And so then when you finally heal that, you're like, man, let me just get someone I really enjoy. looks as part of the equation, but not the whole equation. Man, and all of a sudden your relationship quality changes. And so do you see by going into the shadow how like literally altering that can be for your life? It's destiny changing. But you have to go into the shadow to see it. Some practical things you can do is like keep a journal close by. Notice your behaviors, right? Notice how you feel in certain environments. Notice when you feel like you want to control something versus be able to move through it with ease. Relationships might be one of the most powerful things. I honestly feel like a lot of what a relationship is like holding a mirror to yourself. There's actually a practice I share with my clients at times that I went through for a season, and it's to use the mirror. And the mirror effect is essentially learning to look at yourself. And so you'll notice these aspects or these qualities oftentimes again in a relationship. And maybe it's something you don't enjoy about the other person. They annoy you. Maybe they feel chaotic to you. But you use this mirror to find that similar quality in yourself. And so maybe you're chaotic in your health. Maybe you're chaotic in your friendships. Maybe you're chaotic in your career path. And so while they may look chaotic just from the way they dress, from the way they keep the house, you also have those qualities. And so you're using this mirror to reflect back to you parts of yourself that then you can go into and uncover that shadow. And so as you heal the shadow, again, it changes the nature and the quality of your life. And so the shadow is a massive concept. Again, it's something that the ego won't even want to look at. And so it's very hard to see. So keeping a journal or having a process like the mirror technique will take you into those shadows parts of yourself. So you're not deriving your energy and your life force from those lower level qualities. You're moving into a much higher level quality and therefore creating out of that space. And what you ultimately want to do in life is not create a reality from your fears. You want to create a reality based on what you actually enjoy and what you want. But how will you ever know that if you don't understand your psyche, if you don't understand your shadow? So very powerful stuff, life-changing, destiny-changing stuff right here. I love you so much. If you haven't gone over to my website yet, troyfontana.co, make sure you do that. Also, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Until next time, peace.